Welcome to the Rooted Path Global Podcast, a formation conversation for pastors, denominational leaders, and funders who believe their church is not broken. It is unformed. Hi, I'm A. Damian Kurd, founder of Kingdom Assets LLC and the creator of The Rooted Path. Every episode moves in sequence because sequence is not cosmetic. Sequence is formation. Let us begin.
Picture this. You spend like an entire weekend at a congregational formation retreat, right?
Tell you.
The energy is just electric. People are making these grand plans. They're deeply connected on Sunday morning. And it feels like this massive spiritual high.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Right. And then Wednesday hits.
Yep, reality.
Everyone is back to their day jobs. The emails are piling up. And you just watch every single ounce of that momentum completely evaporate.
It's brutal.
Or imagine you're sitting in a denominational cabinet and a totally routine pastoral leadership transition gets brought up.
Sure.
But instead of treating it as a normal, healthy fact of institutional life, the whole room treats it like a catastrophic interruption. Like the sky is literally falling.
The crisis, yeah.
Exactly. Or, well, here's the most universal one. You're sitting in a board meeting. The very first item on the agenda is a budget shortfall. And you can physically feel the air just get sucked out of the room.
I mean, it's a painfully familiar rhythm for anyone who spent time doing faith-based community work. It really is. And honestly, it carries a massive emotional toll.
It does. Because when you see that pattern repeat over and over, the stalling, the institutional amnesia, the panic over a simple transition, the immediate reaction is to internalize it.
Right. You take it personally.
Exactly. You look around that board meeting and think, well, I guess this congregation just isn't committed enough. We diagnose it as a failure of willpower or a failure of vision.
We feel like the work itself has just fundamentally failed.
Yes, that's exactly how it feels.
But see, if we step back and look at the actual landscape for a second, that diagnosis of failure is completely wrong.
Really?
Yeah. The field of faith-based community development has not failed. In fact, if you look at the last 40 years, the field has successfully completed 5 distinct, massive layers of work.
Okay, 5 layers.
Right. Each generation looked at the specific constraints right in front of them, solved those exact problems, and handed the next generation a demonstrably stronger foundation.
Wait, okay, but if the field is successfully building layer after layer, why does it feel like we're constantly stalling out by Wednesday?
Because, 5 necessary layers were built perfectly, but a 6th layer is still missing.
A 6th layer.
Yeah. Real profound gains are being made every single day in these communities. I mean, the effort is there, the desire is definitely there,
Right.
but those gains just aren't accumulating, they aren't compounding over time. So to understand why, we really have to look at the architectural foundation of what prior generations actually built.
Because each layer sort of set the stage.
Exactly. Each layer solved a critical constraint, but by doing so, it exposed a brand new gap.
Okay, so let's trace this architecture then. If we go back, say, 40 years, what was the first layer the field had to build?
Well, the first layer was philosophy. I mean, before you can build anything, you need a paradigm shift, right? So thinkers and theologians stepped back and realized, hey, we are looking at community development all wrong. They provided a framework for understanding poverty, not merely as a lack of material resources, but as a relational and spiritual fracture.
Okay.
They built what we now call a theology of presence and reconciliation.
Which means what exactly for the average congregation, like on the ground?
It means moving from doing things for a neighborhood to doing things with a neighborhood.
Yeah.
It totally reframed what a church actually owes its community. It's no longer just, handing out canned goods. It's being physically and relationally present.
Oh, I see. I mean, that is a massive mental shift.
Huge.
But it's also like highly theoretical. It's almost like being handed a brilliant architectural blueprint and you have this deep, burning conviction to build a house, but you have no actual map to navigate the terrain.
Yes.
You have the why, but you're completely lacking the how.
And that exact frustration is what drove the next generation to build layer 2, which is methodology.
Okay.
Yeah.
The how?
Right. Practitioners took that philosophical foundation and built incredibly practical, tactile tools. This is where we saw the rise of asset-based community development.
Right. Shifting from deficit thinking like, looking at what a neighborhood lacks to abundance thinking, looking at what it already has.
Precisely. Suddenly, congregational walls were just covered in sticky notes.
Oh, I remember the sticky notes.
Everyone remembers the sticky notes. People were doing neighborhood asset mapping. They were walking the streets, discovering gifts, skills, and resources that were just hiding in plain sight. It was incredibly exciting.
But if they had the philosophical blueprint and they had the practical sticky note methodology, shouldn't that have been enough to sustain the momentum? Like, why did the sticky notes eventually fall down?
Because the methodology exposed the next gap. You see, the tools assumed that a deep internal shift had already occurred within the people using them. Yeah. You can teach a congregation to map neighborhood assets, but if the people walking those streets haven't undergone a fundamental reorientation of their own identity and posture, the methodology just becomes another 6-week workshop.
Right, and as soon as the workshop ends...
they were right back to their old habits.
Ah, okay, so the tools essentially outpaced the people's actual transformation.
Exactly.
So if sticky notes and mapping didn't work because the people themselves hadn't changed inside, someone must have realized, hey, we need to work on their mindsets first. Did the focus shift to the internal work then?
Yes, it did. And that brings us to layer 3, which is formation scholarship. Scholars and practitioners recognized that the internal work had basically just been assumed, so they started actively diagnosing it.
Diagnosing the mindset.
Right. They carefully articulated the specific spiritual and relational postures required inside a leader and inside a congregation before any external tool could truly take root. They named the internal barriers, like savior complexes or deeply ingrained transactional mindsets.
But, okay, here's my issue with that. Knowing you need internal work, even diagnosing the specific required postures, that is not the same as giving a congregation a step-by-step process to actually achieve it.
That's a very fair point.
It sounds like this was delivered primarily as teaching, like as scholarship.
And that is a critical observation. It was diagnostic. It told leaders what the healthy internal work looked like, but it did not give them a replicable system to run it.
So it's kind of like I can read a brilliant peer-reviewed book on cardiovascular health, right? Yeah. And I can completely agree with the scholarship, but that doesn't mean I suddenly possess a daily workout routine that I can sustain. Information doesn't automatically equal transformation.
Exactly. Information is not infrastructure. And, while that formation scholarship was happening, we also saw the rise of layer 4, which is asset stewardship.
Okay, what's that?
Organizations stepped in to help congregations look at their physical realities. They looked at land, facilities, giant buildings that were just sitting idle 6 days a week. They helped congregations activate resources they simply hadn't been trained to see.
Which is incredibly pragmatic. But let me guess, activating a physical building, like, say, renting out the basement to a nonprofit, without doing that underlying human formation we just talked about, that just creates a transaction, right?
Yes.
It's real estate management. It's not true community transformation.
You are tracking the architecture perfectly. It becomes a lease agreement rather than a community revival. Which brings us to layer 5. And it is vital that we really pause here, because layer 5 is perhaps the most crucial and often the most misunderstood investment of the last 40 years.
Okay.
Layer 5 is the leadership ecosystem.
The human infrastructure.
Yes. And we need to honor this layer deeply. I mean, there are foundation program officers, denominational staff, and theological educators listening to this deep dive right now who will recognize their entire life's work in layer 5. Major institutions made generational investments in pipelines, in cohort models, in capacity building. They recognized that all the prior layers, the philosophy, the methodology, the scholarship, the physical assets, they required actual human beings to carry them.
Right. They invested in the leaders themselves. They funded the cohorts. They paid for the training. They built the pipelines.
They did. And it worked.
It did.
We have to be incredibly clear about this. Layer 5 successfully produced a generation of leaders who were better prepared, better formed, and more capable than any generation of faith leaders in recent memory.
That's amazing.
It is. Layer 5 is the absolute hero of the prior layers. It is not the weak link. The people doing this work built the human foundation the field had been desperately waiting for.
Okay, but I have to stop you there.
Yeah.
Because if that's true, if we genuinely have the most brilliantly prepared leaders in history, why does the work still stall? Why does the retreat momentum still evaporate by Wednesday?
Because of a structural limitation that Layer 5 simply could not solve alone. These brilliantly prepared leaders were taken from their specialized cohorts and deployed into local congregations that lacked a shared operating system. Because there was no systemic container to hold the work at the local level, the individual leader was forced to hold the entire weight of the system inside their own personal capacity.
Oh, wow. Okay, let me use an analogy here. It's like, imagine a team of brilliant engineers building the world's most advanced high-performance software program. Right. The code is flawless.
Okay.
But then they try to run it on a piece of hardware that has no operating system installed. The software isn't the problem. The software is perfect. But individual excellence, no matter how brilliant the leader, simply cannot substitute for an operating system. You
Yeah.
cannot ask one human being to be institutional infrastructure.
Yeah, it is the exact tension. Individual leaders cannot and should not be asked to carry what only a system can sustain. The hardware you mentioned has just been sitting there waiting to be plugged into a framework that can actually run the software, which is why the field requires a structural container to hold what Layer 5 built. We need a sixth layer.
Okay. And this is where we have to be very careful with our language, right? Because we're not talking about replacing what those Layer 5 leaders are doing.
Not at all, no.
Yeah.
The sixth layer is strictly additive. It does not fix or replace Layer 5. It holds what Layer 5 built.
It holds it.
Yes. It extends what layers 1 through 4 deposited into congregations. It is catalytic field infrastructure. And this brings us to the rooted path.
So what is that in practice?
The rooted path is that integrated operating infrastructure. It is the sixth layer. And there are 3 inseparable properties that distinguish it from absolutely anything the field has seen before.
Let's break those 3 properties down. If this is the operating system that finally supports these leaders, what's the first property?
The first property is that formation is load-bearing.
Okay, you're placing a lot of vertical weight on that word, formation. Load-bearing meaning what? It's not optional.
It is the structural pillar. Formation cannot be cosmetic, and it cannot be an afterthought. In this system, identity, posture, and theological grounding must precede action. If formation isn't bearing the weight of the structure, the entire framework will produce hollow outcomes and eventually just collapse.
Because if you skip the formation, you're just jumping back to Layer 2, handing out sticky notes, mapping the neighborhood, and acting surprised when the culture doesn't actually change.
Precisely. You have to build the internal capacity to hold the external action.
Makes sense.
So the second property is that the framework operates as a full, continuous 9-phase cycle.
Okay, 9-phase cycle. That can sound a bit like corporate jargon if we don't unpack it. How does a community actually move through this?
It moves sequentially, and every phase relies on the one before it. It starts with recognize waking up to the reality of the community.
Okay.
Then observe actually listening to the neighborhood without a preconceived agenda. Then organize making sense of the data you just gathered. Transform is the internal shift we just talked about.
Right, the load-bearing part.
Yes. Only then do you engage, taking tangible action. After action comes learn. Discern what did we just learn. Reflect is internalizing that lesson. The digital companion tracks the journey. And finally, bless next steps.
Wow. Okay, that is comprehensive. You've mapped out the exact mechanics of how a community goes from an idea to sustained action. But you called it a continuous cycle. Do they ever finish?
No, because communities don't graduate from relationship.
Right.
They don't finish the cycle and say, well, we're done with community development, let's pack it up. When they reach bless next steps, they are simply commissioning the start of a new cycle. They grow deeper inside of it. It becomes the operational heartbeat of the congregation.
Which leads me to a really practical problem.
What's that?
If a congregation is running this continuous multi-year cycle, I mean, human memory is incredibly leaky. We forget things we learned a month ago, let alone 3 years ago. If we are relying on individual humans to hold all this data, we're right back to the Layer 5 problem. This new infrastructure must have a way to hold the memory so the pastor doesn't have to. Is that where the third property comes in?
You've just deduced the necessity of ClearPath Intelligence. That is the technology layer. It is not a consumer product. It is the infrastructure that captures and preserves institutional memory.
No, wait, when you say capturing institutional memory, I have to challenge that a bit.
Go ahead.
Is ClearPath Intelligence just a glorified backup drive for when a pastor leaves? Like, oh no, Pastor Sarah's taking a new call. Quick, let's download her brain onto this hard drive so the new pastor can read it.
No. It is so much more than that. That is a massive misconception. The leadership transition is just one case. ClearPath Intelligence holds institutional memory across multiple critical failure modes that have been quietly draining the momentum out of this field for decades.
Okay, made that real for me. What is a failure mode beyond just the pastor leaving?
Think about multi-year cycles, right? Imagine a congregation doing deep, intentional year 1 formation. They surface incredible insights about their identity and their neighborhood.
Yeah.
But because there's no infrastructure to hold it, by year 3, they've completely forgotten what year 1 revealed.
Oh, I've seen that exact scenario. A church spends an entire year defining their core values, and 2 years later, nobody on the board can even name them.
Exactly.
Tough.
Consider cross-phase insight loss. A congregation does careful, beautiful observation work in phase 2. They map the neighborhood, they listen to the local business owners.
Right.
But without an operating system, that rich, nuanced texture fails to carry forward into phase 5, the engagement phase 2 years later. The actions they end up taking in phase 5 are completely disconnected from what they actually learned in phase 2.
Because the nuance was lost in translation, or it was just forgotten.
Right. And then there are volunteer transitions. This is massive. Institutional memory doesn't just vanish when the pastor leaves. It vanishes when the dedicated deacon who led the observation walks decides to retire.
Oh, man.
Or when the volunteer who ran the community gift inventory moves to a different state. All that relational capital just walks out the door with them.
That is painfully true. The entire community engagement strategy is basically living inside the head of one faithful volunteer named Bob. And when Bob steps down, the church essentially has to start from zero.
Start from zero. That is the exact tragedy of it. Now let's zoom out from the single congregation for a second. ClearPath Intelligence also solves cross-congregational learning gaps.
Wait, how does memory leak across congregations?
Well, imagine Church A discovers a brilliant, highly effective way to navigate a specific zoning challenge in their neighborhood.
Okay.
But Church B, just 3 miles across town, has absolutely no way to benefit from that discovery. Church B is going to spend the next 6 months reinventing the exact same wheel, making the exact same mistakes because the field lacks the connective infrastructure to share the insight.
That isolates these communities so much, it keeps everyone working in silos.
It does. And that isolation scales all the way up to the funder level. We have funder intelligence loss.
Oh, how so?
Foundations are funding congregational vitality initiatives. And without this shared infrastructure, they end up funding the exact same lesson in 2015, in 2020, and again in 2025. The insights from their prior grants never compounded into permanent field-level knowledge.
Wait, if the foundations are losing intelligence, then the denominational bodies must be flying totally blind.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is the final failure mode, denominational pattern blindness. Regional offices and judicatories are forced to make critical resource allocation decisions without the actual field intelligence that their own congregations are producing every single month. They don't have the data because the data evaporates on Wednesday.
Right. So ClearPath Intelligence isn't a backup drive. It's the central nervous system.
It is that.
It prevents institutional amnesia at every single level, from the individual volunteer who retires all the way up to the national foundation that needs to understand decadal trends. It captures the learning, preserves it, and surfaces it exactly when the next cycle needs it.
Yes. When you take these 3 properties together, load-bearing formation, a continuous 9-phase cycle, and ClearPath Intelligence, you produce something the field has not previously had.
A structural container.
A structural container. A system where what is formed is what gets sustained, and what is sustained is what can finally be scaled.
It is an operating system that actually matches the brilliance of the Layer 5 leaders who have been doing this work.
It really is.
So let's bring this right down to the listener, because there are people listening to this deep dive right now who are living inside these exact tensions every single day.
We absolutely need to speak directly to them.
Let's start with the pastors. If you are a pastor listening to this and you have watched the momentum in your congregation evaporate, if you've watched your people get fired up on a retreat and lose it by Wednesday, you need to hear this. Your people are not uncommitted.
No, they're not.
You are not failing as a leader. You just haven't been handed a structure that holds what you and your people are trying to build across time.
And if you are a denominational leader listening right now, and you are exhausted by seeing episodic outcomes that just don't compound, if you're frustrated watching one of your churches thrive while the one across town struggles with the exact same issue, it is because brilliant tools and prepared leaders were handed out without the infrastructure to connect them.
Right. And to the foundation program officers, if you are looking at your congregational vitality portfolios and wondering why you keep funding the same lessons every 5 years, it is not because your grantees are underperforming.
Not at all.
They are doing incredible work. It's because the field learning infrastructure, the system that allows those insights to compound and become shared knowledge, hasn't existed until now.
The work you have all been doing in your congregation, in your denomination, in your foundation is real. It is necessary, and it has mattered deeply. But if that work has not been accumulating the way you hoped, we have to reframe the diagnosis. That is not a failure of your effort. It is a failure of the infrastructure underneath your effort.
We've talked about this architecture, and it really makes you wonder, if we implement this shared operating system across hundreds of communities, what does faith-based organizing look like in 10 years?
It changes everything.
What does a community look like when institutional memory spans an entire generation and they never have to start from zero again?
That is the exact future this infrastructure builds. The previous 5 layers laid an incredible foundation. They built the philosophy, the methodology, the scholarship, the asset awareness, and the brilliantly prepared leaders.
They did the hard work.
They did.
Huh.
The field built the door, but you cannot live in a door. This system is the house that holds it all together. What you build on top of it will finally hold. Stay rooted, my friends.